Welcome into a brand new episode of the Whole Story Podcast. On today's episode, Jayson Stark, senior writer for The Athletic and in-studio host for the MLB Network. Jayson, thank you for joining the podcast today. And this is a little different form of a podcast, I guess you could say.
Hey, the world is changing. What did we all do before there was Zoom, huh? Zoom is awesome.
It's awesome, and you can have different cool things, and actually after this ends, I'll be able to save it as an MP3 version, so I'll still be able to upload it to all the podcasting platforms, but also take this video and put it onto YouTube. So you kind of have both mediums in a way, which is awesome to do.
Yeah, what a time to be alive.
So this is the first time that you've actually been on my podcast since you started with The Athletic. How different is it now for you, and what's your favorite part about working with The Athletic now?
Well, I tell people all the time, Alex, that The Athletic is writer heaven. It's just the most writer-friendly, writer-driven place you could ever hope to work. And so just from that standpoint, as somebody who loves the art of writing, the process of writing, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic experience. Just the pure writing part of it. I also love The Athletic as a reader. I think media is changing, media is evolving, just like everything in the world is. And what people wanted to read is so different now than what it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And The Athletic is that place that has jumped ahead of the curve, I think. We're sending people into press boxes, or at least we used to back in the day when we could go to press boxes. And we would watch the same games that everybody else around us watched. But our mission was so different. Our mission was not to tell people what happened, but to look at it and say, what's it mean? Where's it leading? That little moment in the middle of this game that might not have affected the outcome in some significant way, but was really a cool thing that happened that you never see. Let's hone in on that. And so our focus is just different than most of the media world. And the response has been incredible. So just from all those aspects, it's so rewarding. I love writing for it. I love reading it.
You mentioned you've always wanted to be a writer your whole entire life, and your mom was actually a writer as well. What was the biggest lesson that you learned from your mom in a writer's perspective?
Wow. There'd certainly be more than just one. I should mention my mom's name, June Herder Stark, was just a wonderful, quick-witted, phrase-turning writer who taught me a love of reading and writing. When I was growing up, she read every word in all the Philadelphia newspapers every day, and she could not wait to tell me about the greatest thing she read today, to show it to me, to share it with me, and really infused in me this love of reading and writing. And the sports part of it I came to on my own, but I really think it was just that simple part of it, the love of it, the passion for it. The people tell me all the time that when I write about baseball, it comes through how much I love baseball and how much I love writing about it. I really think a lot of that was derived from my mother, because that's the way she felt about everything she did, everything she wrote. So she shared that with me in a way that has obviously shaped my whole life. And then again, she loved a good line, loved to quip, loved to pun, loved to just turn a phrase. And I don't know where I would have learned that, but I learned it from her first.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the love for reading. You have a lot of books behind you in your book room, I guess you could say, your office. And the love for writing obviously has shown. You're a Hall of Fame writer. And looking back at it as a kid, You've always loved the art of writing, and you've always had a passion for it. Did you ever think that, again, you tested out the waters in news, but simply wanted to eventually get back to sports? Did you ever think about writing anything outside of news or sports to try something different?
What do you mean, like fiction?
Yeah, fiction.
I don't know. I don't know that I could write fiction. Maybe I could. Maybe someday I will write a novel, mess around with it. I don't know that I could do that, but like there was a time when I first was dabbling in becoming a writer. I wrote about music. I interviewed a bunch of musicians when I was living in Newport, Rhode Island right after I got out of school.
Of Newport.
And that was cool. That was a fun thing to do. I do have this incredible love of music, as anybody who knows me knows. I might have gone down that road, but I talk about this all the time. I'm literally doing what I dreamed about doing from the time I was old enough to dream about doing anything. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be a sports writer. It's what I dreamed of. And I look around and I think to myself sometimes, how the heck did this ever happen to me?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned music. What's your go-to song?
One song. I love all kinds of music. I guess it's mandatory that all sports writers say they love Springsteen, right? And when I really need to put a smile on my face, there's a bunch of different Bruce songs that I'll go to. Thunder Road and Jungle Land, or even Sherry Darling, there's a lot of them. But I should make it clear that I love all genres of music, old, new, you name it. I probably do listen to it.
Now, not only do you write for The Athletic, you also host a podcast with Doug Glanville, Starkville, and who knows, Doug Glanville might actually not be on the podcast anymore.
Yeah, the drama is mounting there. On the last edition of Starkville, Doug and I started debating Field of Dreams. Mm-hmm. And his feeling is Field of Dreams is overrated. Now, Field of Dreams may be flawed. It may require an incredible suspension of disbelief in many ways, but it's so iconic that, like, I read a quote from Bill Simmons to Doug that basically said, if he goes out on a date and he asks the girl he's on the date with, what do you think of Field of Dreams? If she says, I don't like Field of Dreams, he would drop her, right? He wouldn't date her anymore. And so I said to Doug, kind of innocently, I don't know if you can continue on this podcast if you're not going to get on board with Field of Dreams. And the next thing I knew, we had a Twitter poll. People were voting about whether Doug should stay on the podcast or go. A referendum on Field of Dreams. I believe it came out 57 to 43%. Doug must go. And so, the next episode of Starkville, we've got some big, big decisions to make about the future of Doug. I'm assuming that only the mayor of Starkville can decide whether Doug stays or goes, and we ignore the will of the people. But it's going to be controversial either way.
Now, Doug did say that he considers that movie basically a sci-fi film. So I have a proposition. I feel like you should do a Starkville episode from the set of Field of Dreams in Iowa to prove to Doug that it's not sci-fi and it's real, and you can feel the movie when you're sitting on the field.
I mean, it might be tough to take a trip to Iowa right now. It'd be tough to take a day trip to Iowa anytime because we both live on the East Coast. But I do think that Doug needs to walk out of a cornfield just once and experience the meaning of that to truly appreciate the Field of Dreams.
Now let's go back again. This podcast is really centered around your career. Syracuse University, a Syracuse alum. What does Syracuse mean to you looking back on your career?
I've spoken at Syracuse, and here's what I tell people there. Syracuse set me up to lead this life that I've been lucky enough to lead. I went there to learn to be a writer and a sports writer. And because of Syracuse, because it's such an amazing place, because Newhouse is such an amazing place, because you're surrounded by people who love writing and love the communications business as much as we do, that it prepares you so well for a career as a writer. I went into newspapers. That was a thing when I got out of college. And that's propelled me to all the different places I've been. But I don't know that any of it happens quite the way it happened if I had not gone to Syracuse. There's an incredible community of Newhouse grads, Newhouse alum, Newhouse students. My daughter then went to Syracuse. She was in the School of Sport Management. I have a tremendous connection now with that department. And, the way people who attend Syracuse connect with each other through the years, through the miles, through all these different communities is special. I'm sure people say that at every school, but it's true. I'm sure Costas told you the same thing.
You mentioned either broadcasters or past writers that went to Syracuse. It almost seems like if there was ever to be a reunion of people who go to Syracuse, it's surprising whenever I interview someone and I look back to see where they went to college, it almost seems like 99% of them came out of Syracuse.
All right. I'll take the under on that, but it is pretty funny. I remember I once was at a spring training game in Clearwater a few years back, and I was sitting there. Jim Jackson, who does the pregame show for the Phillies, was there. Trying to think who else was there. Michael Barkan, who is like an iconic host at NBC Sports Philadelphia. He was sitting there. There was another writer there. I can't remember, but we realized that we had all gone to Syracuse. Not all at the same time, but you do get yourself into crowds like that, and it's cool. So here's a shout out to everyone at the Q's who's shoveling snow right now in May. Well, it's April, sorry.
I'm in Albany, New York area, and it does feel like it does snow here a lot. So I definitely feel that. Internal toughness is something you had to develop at Syracuse. How much did that translate into to where you are today?
The fact that in order to get to class, you had to walk through a blizzard 3 times a week. Okay, that may be tougher. I'll go with that. That sounds good. When my daughter was thinking about going there, we went on a tour, right? And this was the last week of August. Drove up to Syracuse from Pennsylvania and took this tour. It was the most beautiful day in the history of Syracuse. I went there for 4 years. I've been back many times. This is the single most gorgeous day that I've ever spent there. Right, so we had this amazing tour, great tour guide. I could tell she loved it. Spent like an hour and a half walking around campus. And now we're back at where we started. And he says to us, does anyone have any more questions? And I looked around and I thought, I got to ask this. So I said to him, how can you spend an hour and a half talking about Syracuse and never once mention the weather? Because that's what everybody else mentions, right? And he looked at me and he said, it's just weather, right? And if you go to this great school, who cares? It's just weather. And I've used that line a million times. I tell people, like if you're from the Bahamas or something, and you've never seen winter or snow, you probably shouldn't go there. But if you're familiar with winter, what's the difference? It's just winter. There's just more of it. But it's an amazing place if you're somebody like us and wants to do what we get to do.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite moment that sticks out to you in the years that you've covered baseball?
Wow. To try to pick one moment is hard. This is a separate category really unto itself, but obviously winning the Spink Award spending induction weekend, really the whole week in Cooperstown, New York, and walking around like I was living in some kind of dream last July. That's pretty much number one on the list. You know, that was memories for a lifetime, Alex, and not just for me. It was for so many people who have been there as part of the journey through all the years, and people I love and care about. We had over 100 friends and family who came from all over the country just for me. And it was I really believe this. It was just as special for them as it was for me, because we knew that we had shared something incredible. And just the way the greatest players who ever lived treated me through that entire experience, I'll never forget that. From the moment Wade Boggs walked up to me in the bar at the Otesaga Hotel, I think this was on Thursday of induction weekend, and said, "Welcome to the club," to, you know, the moment I walked out the door and we left to head home, they treated me like one of them. And just a couple little stories about that. Saturday was the day I gave my speech. And so all the living Hall of Famers assemble in a room at the Otesaga to get ready to head for Doubleday Field, where the ceremony is. And so I got there first. I wasn't going to be late for my own Hall of Fame induction, right? So, it starts out, just a few guys are sort of hanging around the room and a little chit chat. But then all of a sudden, I'd been there maybe 15, 20 minutes, and I looked around me and realized who else was in the room. The greatest living baseball players were in the room, and I was in the room. And I had to get up and try to figure out, how am I going to breathe? Okay, so I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll walk down the hallway to the men's room. Just give me a little breather. I'll breathe. So I started walking. The next thing I know, Jeff Bagwell is walking alongside of me, and he says, "How are you doing?" I said, "Jeff, I'm doing fine." But as I was looking around the room, I had a hard time trying to figure out what I was doing in that room. And he said, "Oh, me too." I said, "Wait a second. You too? You realize that you're a Hall of Famer, right?" He said, "Oh yeah, I know that, but I don't think of myself as a Hall of Famer the way those guys think of themselves as Hall of Famers." And it really helped relax me to know that when you're in a room with Ken Griffey and Hank Aaron and Sandy Koufax and Brooks Robinson, I could keep going, it's not just people like me who realize you've just walked out of that cornfield in Iowa. Right. And then the next day, getting ready to go to the Clark Athletic Center for the players induction, I walk in the room, and Jim Thome saw me, and he kind of patted the chair next to him. So I sat down with him, and I wound up at this table. He was hitting with this unbelievable group. I can't remember everybody who was there, but Wade Boggs was part of it. So these guys are going along, and it's the middle of this incredible conversation. And now, to me, the director of the Hall of Fame, executive director of the Hall of Fame, comes up to Jim Thome, puts his hand on his shoulder and says, "Hey, Jim, I just want to let you know that we're going to seat you next to Hank Aaron on the stage today." And I saw the look on Jim Thome's face, right? And that look told me, wow, he felt just like I felt. I said, "Jim, you ever look around the room and feel like you don't belong in this room?" And he said, "Absolutely, man. Look at who's in the room." And I said, "Well, I know that if you think that, you can only imagine how I feel. I know that I don't belong in this room." He said, "Oh, no, yeah, yes, you do. Nobody belongs in this room more than you. The career you've had, blah, 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 blah. You definitely belong." And I said, "Look, I really appreciate that, but I'm incredibly aware that you hit 600 more home runs than I hit." And so, as writers, we have our place among the legends. Mm-hmm. And I understood my place through that entire weekend. But of everything that I've experienced in this job, nothing's going to top that.
When you first heard the news that you were going to be inducted, who was one of the first players that reached out to you?
Man, like that day, was such a blur because I was at the winter meetings. And so imagine finding out that you won the Spink Award, you're going to be honored in Cooperstown, when you're in a place where you literally know 1,000 people. Like that's what was happening. I could have just spent the entire day standing in the lobby, hugging people. Okay, the whole day, 8 hours, 10 hours, as long as I wanted to stand there. And so just this one parade of baseball legend after another who just seemed like they felt so happy for me. I did get a bunch of texts from players and GMs and the commissioner and Bud Selig, but I think Jeff Bagwell might have been the first. I looked out on my phone and there was this text from him and it said, "My man," like 12 exclamation points. And I thought, wait, Jeff Bagwell and I are on a my man relationship? Didn't know that, but he's the best. And I don't want to single out anybody, but I think he was probably the first text from a player.
It's funny that you mentioned that you found out during the winter meetings, which is the winter meetings, one of the busiest times of the year as a baseball writer.
Yeah, I didn't get much work done. I have to admit, I did not get much accomplished that winter meetings. Just kind of riding on the cloud. I did a bunch of TV. Did a lot of radio. I did some podcasts. I spent a lot of time chatting up all kinds of people, but they all wanted to talk about me. It's not what I'm there for, but I think everybody kind of understood what the moment was. And so I just don't look back in my archive at that week and expect to see some sports writing magic from me because I didn't do much of that.
It was one of the proudest moments of your career, and rightfully so. That's, your dream came true.
It only happens once.
Exactly.
That really is the thing. I did think about my mom, think about my dad, because, hey, it's what you do, right? Those moments are really about the journey and everybody who was part of that journey. And like, this is another great piece of Jim Thome advice. This came later. This came July. This was in Cooperstown. Another one of these moments where I got on the bus to go give my speech and I didn't know what to do or where to sit. And again, he kind of motioned me over and said, hey, sit with me. And so one of the things I said to him was, when you were giving your speech, did you look out at your family? People tell you, don't do that it's too emotional. He said, oh, yeah, you got to do that. That's what it's all about. You got to look at the people you love. That's what you're there for. And it was the best piece of advice because I made sure when I gave that speech to look into the eyes of my wife, my kids, my mother-in-law, my family, and I'll never forget the look in their eyes. Hopefully they'll never forget the look in my eyes. And we shared that. And Alex, that's what dreams are. That's what dreams are all about, is not just saying, whew, my dream came true, but the fact that everybody who shared that dream gets to enjoy it too.
Jayson, this is my favorite part of the show. It's called the Fast Five Quick Round. It's 5 quick questions, and you have however long you take to answer them. Are you ready?
I'm ready, I think.
Go-to snack.
Go-to snack. Chocolate. Like I'm right now, I'm totally addicted to those dark chocolate bark things,
Yes.
The pretzel bark, the almond bark. Completely addicted to those. I have to hide a bag behind my computer monitor so my wife doesn't know that I'm sneaking them all day long. Hopefully she won't watch this.
My favorite candy are the dark chocolate Kit Kats. You can't really find them too much.
Never seen them.
Oh my, they're my favorite. They're my favorite. You have to try them.
Good. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. And I'm kind of sharing, by the way, on the podcast that you did earlier this week. It seems like 5 weeks ago. Every day it seems like it's like Groundhog's Day in a certain way. But we actually ordered groceries online, and I tried to tell my parents, well, this is what I heard. It doesn't really work out too well. And there you go. Well, we're still gonna try it. So
it's really hit or miss on
yes.
the grocery delivery front, but we've got a few tricks that we've learned now. I cannot reveal them, or my wife would have to shoot me. But we've got some tricks that we figured out to enhance your chances of getting something that you ordered. But what you heard me say in the podcast was place a huge order at a major national grocer. You had to wait 6 days for it to arrive. And then when it arrived, I got 2 items, 2.
Hopefully one of the 2 was a dark chocolate bark.
No,
No?
I did get that in a subsequent order from another store, however. But I can't reveal a whole lot about this.
If you could co-write an article on The Athletic with anyone, who would you choose?
If I could co-write, wow, we have some incredible writers, and I've just come off a stretch where I've written some really fun, not always fun, but amazing projects. I shared one with Eno Saris where we developed our own code breaker algorithm, and stole signs, and then I got to show them to Max Scherzer and Kurt Suzuki, and that was incredible. Ken Rosenthal and I have teamed up on quite a few pieces. If there was one other person that I could combine with besides those 2, Andy McCulley, Mark Carrig would be fun. But how about Seth Davis? Like when I first got hired, Seth reached out to me and said, I know you love basketball. We once actually did a basketball show together, the Phil Martelli show. And he said, if you ever want to write any basketball story, you just let me know. I've never done it, but I do love college hoops when there actually are college hoops to love. And maybe Seth and I could combine on something someday, or my friend Dana O'Neill.
One of my favorite questions to ask someone that has seen so many great moments in sports, when was the last time you were shocked?
Where I said, oh, wow, did that just happen? Well, the very last baseball game I covered that counted was Game 7 of the World Series. And the Howie Kendrick homer shocked me. Like now the more I know about it, it should be even more shocking, because in that pitch from Will Harris, he threw it hundreds of times during the season. Literally nobody hit that pitch, not just for a home run, but where Howie Kendrick hit that ball. And the way that World Series turned was breathtaking. Sure you agree. My friend Adnan Burke and I were talking about this recently, and here's what I told him. It reminds me of Pedro in the Aaron Boone game, the way Zach Greinke was just ripping through the lineup, and he was in total control until he wasn't, and the Red Sox were going to win until they weren't. And this had the same feeling as that game in some ways.
If you could title a chapter after where you are in life today, your current chapter in your life, what would you name it?
This chapter of my life? Living the dream. I mean, we touched on that, but for obvious reasons. I have literally lived the life that I dreamed of living from the time I was 10 years old. When I decided I wanted to be a sports writer, I'd go to ballparks with my binoculars, turn around, turn the binoculars on the press box and try to figure out what the heck everybody was doing up there. And that happened to me. Just the coolest thing ever.
The last one about the Fast Five. Again, behind you, a lot of sports memorabilia, some books. What's your favorite piece of a sports memorabilia that you own?
I'm not really a memorabilia kind of guy, but I have had this accidental bobblehead collection that's developed. I have Peter Gammons bobblehead. That's a good one. But, people were asking the other day at the Athletic for people to post a photo of just the most random piece of memorabilia that we own. So maybe you saw this. I posted a photo of a Grady Little bobblehead from the game we just referenced. What are the odds of that? The Pedro game. Grady's finally going to the mound to take out Pedro. And somehow there's a bobblehead that commemorates that. Who knew?
Okay, so my last question for you on this podcast is simple. If a kid came up to you and asked you, why baseball? I'm not a fan. Why should I watch? What would you say to them?
I don't ever want to lecture anybody about what they should or shouldn't like, but baseball is unique among all the sports in so many ways. And you could probably guess my favorite thing or things about it. People care about the history of baseball in a way that they don't care about the history of other sports. It's why we argue about the Hall of Fame. It's why you can see something insane happen at a game and think, nobody's ever seen that happen before, and then find out that Babe Ruth did it, right? Babe Ruth did everything, right? But if you find out that the entire group of people who ever did this thing are like Anibal Sanchez and Babe Ruth when he was a pitcher, like that's cool. The numbers of baseball are the coolest numbers, and people care about them in a way that they don't care about the numbers in any other sport. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know here, but I love numbers. I love the numbers of baseball. And, I hope that one of the things that people can tell about me is, and I don't love the numbers for the numbers' sake. I love the numbers because they aren't the game, but they illuminate the game. They tell us things about the game. And I'm always looking for insights into the game through the numbers. And people use those numbers in baseball in incredibly creative ways. As somebody who loves to write and read about baseball, we have amazing access to get to know people in the game, players in the game. And so I've kind of got this reputation as like I'm the funny writer. I try to find the humor and the joy in baseball. And I've met some of the funniest people I've ever known in my life through baseball because we have that access and we share that love for it. So there's definitely that. And then there's just that remarkable range of possibilities every day when you go to a game. My mom always told me I should write a book and call it I Never Saw That Before. I never actually wrote that book, but in some ways, I've been writing a chapter throughout my career. Stuff happens that shouldn't possibly ever happen, and then it does, right? You think that's impossible until it's possible. And baseball is just full of those moments. I love it for that. It's a different game than basketball or football or hockey. I recognize it's different. I recognize it's slower. I think baseball needs better rhythm and more people run around the bases. But there is the way a moment can hang there for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, even 8, 9, 10 minutes if it's a long enough at bat. That one single dramatic moment where you can't breathe, that's unique to baseball too. So baseball's got all that special stuff going for it. And I listen to a lot of people talk about what's wrong with baseball. I think I just spent a few minutes talking about what's right with it, right?
One quick follow-up to that. What's interesting about baseball, Jayson, is when you go to a football game or a basketball game or a hockey game, you're not seeing anyone in the crowd keeping score and using that scorebook. But when you go to a baseball game, you still have people, well, I guess not today, but in last season, using the scorebook in the stands. And what's one of your favorite stats to wrap up this show that always sticks, again, in the front of your mind when you think of statistics in baseball?
Well, first of all, let me ask you about that. That used to be one of my favorite things about baseball, too. Now, when I do sit in the stands, almost nobody keeps score. Like, are people around you keeping score?
I definitely see some people keeping score. Actually, now there's apps that you can keep score in. Or sometimes, I guess maybe I'm old school, but sometimes if I go to a Yankee game, I'll put in one of my AirPods and listen to John Sterling, even though it's a little behind because it's live in, on
Right.
that, but you still get that aspect. And sometimes I'll bring a scorebook or I'll get one at the stadium. But I think some of my friends that usually go to games still keep score in some way.
That's great. My daughter, Hallie, who actually now works in baseball, in social media and marketing, she was the one kid in my family who she would see me keeping score, and she said, "Dad, teach me how to keep score." And so we once were at a game where Eric Milton took a no-hitter into the ninth. And then, the irony here is that the no-hitter ended in the ninth in a ball that fooled Doug Glanville. He broke back on it and then charged in, didn't quite get there. But Hallie was keeping score of that game, and she was so excited that she was keeping score of a no-hitter, and then it wasn't a no-hitter. She stopped the second the ball dropped in. But like, I have all my score books from through the years. I don't keep score of every game in that book anymore, but there's some scorekeeping of some really remarkable games in there. Mm-hmm. And so now back to your question, just one go-to stat. This is actually something I'm going to write about here because as we wait for baseball, we're going to revive some of my favorite strange but true games of the past. And this is a game, I did write about this in my Wild Pitches book. Bengie Molina hit a home run, didn't score a run on his own home run, right? So you may be asking yourself, wait, that can't happen. That's impossible. Here's what happened, right? Bengie Molina hits a ball in San Francisco off the top of the fence and left field. And because he's Bengie Molina, he stops at first base, right? So crowd's roaring. Bruce Bochy's managing. Bruce Bochy taps a pinch runner on the shoulder. The pinch runner goes in and runs for Bengie Molina. And while all this is going on, Omar Vizquel's on the team, and he goes up to Bruce Bochy and he says, "You know what? I think that ball actually went over the fence and then bounced back on the field. I would ask for a replay if I were you. I'd challenge that if I were you." And so he says, "Okay, why not?" So he goes out. He asks the umpires to take a look at it. Umpires look at the replay. Sure enough, Omar Vizquel got it right. Ball went over the fence, bounced back in. It's a home run. And now, here comes Bengie Molina trotting back toward first base to finish his home run trot. And I can't remember who the first base umpire was, but he starts waving his arm saying, no, you're out of the game. You can't come back in the game. Even to finish my own home run trot? And he said, no, you're out of the game. So Bengie Molina, look at the box score of this game. Home run, but no run scored. And this is one of those things that I'm talking about. This is so impossible that Baseball Reference, for years, I haven't checked this lately, I'll have to do this before I write this piece. Mm-hmm. Baseball Reference could not convince its computers that this actually happened. Oh, wow. Okay, because it can't, right? Like, this is not possible for a guy not to score a run on his own home run trot, but it happened to Bengie Molina. So top that, Alex.
It's just a stat that gets you excited for hopefully baseball soon. But Jayson, thanks again for coming on the podcast today. Where can everyone follow you on social media and read your work on The Athletic?
Well, Alex, first off, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. You can find me on Twitter at Jayson with a Y, so Jayson. like Jayson Stark. I have a work Facebook page. You can search for Jayson Stark. I post some photos on Instagram from ballparks when I actually get to go to ballparks. Those would be my 3 main go-to social media platforms. And you can find me on The Athletic. If you're a subscriber, you can search for me and highlight me as one of your writers that you follow. If you're not a subscriber, we're now offering a 90-day free trial. And even in this time, Alex, when there's no sports, I am amazed by the people I work with, the creativity, and just the incredible array of stories on every sport, but stories on baseball that my coworkers have produced in this time. It's so cool. I mean, we all recognize that there are more important things going on in the world right now, but there's still people in the world who care about sports, who miss sports. We're a sports site. It's okay to connect with those people because they need it. We tell stories. These stories are different than the stories we thought we'd be telling right now, but there's still a need to tell them. So I appreciate working for a place that continues to connect with those people. And I really appreciate you for having me on your podcast. It's really been fun.